Hi, as we continue with the third quarter app bonanza, this is demonstrating an app called AntennaPod. I am on the Play Store of the app and would first like to let you hear the description of the app so you can determine as to whether or not this is an app you would like to be associated with. I'll now navigate my way to the About, and then when I'm done, I'll install it, and then we will go through the tour and look at the settings and all that this entails. AntennaPod is an open source app. Here is the About.
About this app, heading. Google Play Store, AntennaPod, details. Easy to use, flexible and open source podcast manager and player. AntennaPod is a podcast manager and player that gives you instant access to millions of free and paid podcasts, from independent podcasters to large publishing houses such as the BBC, NPR and CNN. Add, import and export their feeds hassle-free using the Apple Podcasts database, OPML files or simple RSS URLs. Download, stream or queue episodes and enjoy them the way you like with adjustable playback speeds, chapter support and a sleep timer. Save effort, battery power and mobile data usage with powerful automation controls for downloading episodes, specify times, intervals and Wi-Fi networks, and deleting episodes based on your favorites and delay settings. Made by podcast enthusiasts, AntennaPod is free in all senses of the word. Open source, no costs, no ads. Import, organize and play. Manage playback from anywhere. Home screen widget, system notification and earplug and Bluetooth controls. Add and import feeds via the Apple Podcasts, gpodder.net, FYYD or podcast index directories, OPML files and RSS or Atom links. Enjoy listening your way with adjustable playback speed, chapter support, remembered playback position and an advanced sleep timer, shake to reset, lower volume. Access password protected feeds and episodes. Keep track, share and appreciate. Keep track of the best by marking episodes as favorites. Find that one episode through the playback history or by searching titles and show notes. Share episodes and feeds through advanced social media and email options, the gpodder.net services and via OPML export. Control the system. Take control over automated downloading. Choose feeds, exclude mobile networks, select specific Wi-Fi networks, require the phone to be charging and set times or intervals. Manage storage by setting the amount of cached episodes, smart deletion and selecting your preferred location. Adapt to your environment using the light and dark theme. Back up your subscriptions with the gpodder.net integration and OPML export. Join the AntennaPod community. AntennaPod is under active development by volunteers. You can contribute too, with code or with comment. Our friendly forum members are happy to help with every question you have. You are invited to discuss features and podcasting in general, too. https://forum.antennapod.org/. Transifex is the place to help with translations. https://www.transifex.com/antennapod/antennapod.
And that's the description of the app. One thing that strikes me that I like so much is the fact that it's ad-free and open source. As indicated, you can contribute by sending your feedback and all of that if you cannot contribute code-wise. I'll now go back to the page and install it. Let's go ahead.
Play Store. About this app, heading.
And now I'll scroll back to top and tap on Install.
Install button.
There we go.
AntennaPod. 3%. 100%.
It's done installing, and now I'll tap on Open.
Open button.
Here's the Open.
AntennaPod. Open menu button.
I am now in the menu eye of the app, and the first thing we heard was Menu, and that's on the top left corner. Moving on to the right, let's explore what we have.
Home.
We heard Home. Moving on.
Search button.
Moving on.
More options button.
And more options there on the top right corner. That's the last button there on the top right corner. Let's move on down toward the bottom and see if we find any buttons or any controls. Moving my finger down.
You are not subscribed to any podcasts yet. Open the side menu to add a podcast.
I am being told that I'm not subscribed to any podcasts as of yet, and that I could tap on the open menu, which is that button on the top left, to go discover podcasts that I could subscribe to. That's all that we have. Moving my finger down, nothing. Let's go back up though to the top and look at those buttons, especially the more options and then menu button on the top left. Let's get started though first by looking at the more options found near the top right corner of the phone. I'll now tap on more options.
More options button. Pop-up window. Refresh. In list.
Tapping on more options, the menu pops up and we've got refresh. Moving on.
Configure home screen.
We've got the configure home screen, and that's all we have. Let's go ahead and tap on configure home screen.
Configure home screen. Sort. Continue listening. In list.
Moving on down.
Sort. See what's new.
Next.
Sort. Get surprised.
Next.
Sort. Check your classics.
Next.
Sort. Manage downloads.
Next.
Hidden.
And we heard hidden. Next.
Reset. Button. Out of list.
We have a reset button there on left and in the middle.
Cancel. Button.
There's the cancel, and to the right edge
Confirm. Button.
is the confirm. That's all that we have here on this screen. I'll go back.
AntennaPod. More options. Button.
Now let's move on to the menu found on the top left corner. I'll now tap on that menu found on the top left.
Open menu. Button.
Tap.
Settings.
Tapping on the menu, we heard settings. And I do want to mention here that settings that we heard is not at the top. Instead, it's at the bottom left corner of the phone. Now, let's start from the top though, and before we get to the settings, let's see what items we have here in the menu. I'm starting from the top.
Selected. Home.
We heard selected home. Moving on down.
Queue.
That's queue, where you can go check to see what items you have in queue. Next.
Inbox.
Next.
Episodes.
Of course, all of these things explain what they are by just hearing their names. Next.
Subscriptions.
That's where you can check your subscriptions. Next.
Downloads.
Next.
Playback history.
Next.
Add podcast.
Add podcast. This is where you could go in and look at all the different categories, or you could search for your own podcast that you want instead of going through the lists and find out what you would need to subscribe to. That's the last item there in that menu. Let's move on down though to the settings on that bottom left.
Settings. Out of list.
I'll now tap on settings.
Settings. Navigate up. Button.
We're now on the settings page, and I'll explore downward and look at the items we have in settings. I may not necessarily be going into each and every one of them, except for things that I consider of great importance. Let's get started. Moving on down.
Search. In list.
We heard search. It's like a button there. If you tap on it, it'll open up the search, but to the right of it, you have the search edit field.
Search. Edit box.
Moving on down.
User interface. Appearance. Subscriptions. Lock screen.
Next.
Playback. Headphone controls. Skip intervals. Queue.
In other words, you can go in here and configure how you'd like to interact when you have your headphone and all of that. Next.
Downloads. Update interval. Mobile data. Automatic download. Automatic deletion.
That explains itself. Lots of things in there. Next.
Synchronization. Synchronize with other devices.
In other words, you can go in here and log in to sync with other devices. In other words, if you play something on one device and you want to pick up from another device, once you configure this, then you will be able to do so. I do want to mention here, though, that you will need to go to the gpodder.net. That's GPODDER.net, and then sign up for gpodder, and you should be able to use that login and go in here and then log on to it. Another way of doing it is that you can also configure something on your home server, and they have instructions on how to go about that. gpodder is not necessarily associated with AntennaPod. Moving on.
Import-export. Move subscriptions and queue to another device.
So if you have other subscriptions from some other podcast client that you would like to import, this may even be easier. So all that you need to do is to simply go here and then go choose that XML or PML file, and then you'll be able to get your subscriptions. Next.
Notifications.
We move on to notifications. Next.
Project. Heading.
We're now on a heading called Project. Let's move on.
Documentation and support.
Next.
User forum.
Next.
Contribute.
Next.
Report bug.
Next.
About.
And that's the last item there, the about. I want to go back though to that import/export thing to see how we could import an existing subscription to other podcasts that we have using another client. I believe I do have my Pocket Casts on here, and I should be able to import some of my stuff that I've exported from the Pocket Casts. Let's go back and tap on that feature.
Import-export. Move subscriptions and queue to another device. Import-export. Navigate up. Button. Out of list.
I am on the import/export page, and let's go through see what we have.
Database export. Transfer subscriptions, listened episodes and queue to AntennaPod on another device.
Next.
Automatic database export. Create a backup of the AntennaPod database every 3 days. Only keep the 5 most recent backups. Off, switch.
Next.
Database import. Import AntennaPod database from another device.
Next.
OPML, heading.
We now come to that OPML heading, and next.
OPML export. Transfer your subscriptions to another podcast app.
Next.
OPML import. Import your subscriptions from another podcast app.
That's the one I would like to try, but before we do that, let's see what else we have in here.
HTML, heading.
Next.
HTML export. Show your subscriptions to a friend.
Next.
Favorites export. Export saved favorites to file.
And that's the last item here. Let's go back up though and tap on that OPML import.
OPML import. Import your subscriptions from another podcast app.
And I'll tap.
Settings. Recent. Show routes. Button. Out of list.
I am now in the area where I could import the list of podcast subscriptions that I want. By default, none of these is checked. So you'll have to check the ones that you want, and hopefully maybe if I check one, we could find a menu where we could say select all. Let's see what we have.
Renewing your mind with RC. Sproul.
And I'll tap to check it.
Checked.
All right, now let me check near the top of the phone to see if there's a menu where we could tell it to select all.
Select all. Button. Out of list.
There's a select all there on the top right, and I'll tap.
Deselect all. Button.
And that turns into deselect all. Now at the very bottom, we've got a couple buttons.
Cancel. Button.
Cancel. And to the very right edge of the phone,
Confirm. Button.
confirm that indeed I want to import these. I'll tap confirm.
AntennaPod. Import podcast list OPML. Subscriptions. Out of grid. Agora Podcast Network. Column 1. Android Developers Backstage. Row 2. Column 3. Blind Android Users Podcast. Row 3.
Those are some of the ones that I have subscribed to. So if I tap here, for example, Blind
Back
Android Users.
button. Out of grid.
I am now in the Blind Android Users podcast area, and putting my finger down, we find
Blind Android Users Podcast.
and moving down in the mid section of the phone just from the top,
Show Information button.
we got Show Information button. Moving to the right,
Filter button.
next there's another button,
Show Podcast Settings button.
Show Podcast Settings, and those are the buttons that we have. Now below that will be the various episodes. Moving my finger down,
Episode 189, A Visit with Olga from RH Voice, July 20th, 2024, 78 megabytes, duration, 1 hour 21 minutes.
and to the right of that is the download.
Download.
Now that's if you want to download it. Now if I move my finger back,
Episode 189, A Visit with Olga from RH Voice, July 20th, 2024, 78 megabytes, duration, 1 hour 21 minutes.
and I'm going to tap.
Back button. Out of list.
Tapping on that and putting my finger down, we got,
Stream.
there's a stream. Moving to the right,
Download.
there's a download. Move my finger down,
Episode 189 RH Voice and Android 15 Beta 4, Heading 1.
and moving down.
Welcome to episode 189.
So basically, that's like the welcome. Those are the show notes.
Announcements, Heading 2.
And we got the announcement section. And
Bullet, 1 of 3, 3 items.
moving down.
Google is banning low-quality apps from the Play. Android Basics, Heading 2.
And we got the Android Basics.
Web view.
I scroll down.
Commentary, Kareen demonstrates the Heading 2. Staying in touch, Heading 2.
And that's the last heading there. And that's what it is. Now you know how to manage your AntennaPod. Thanks for listening.